Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I'm Sterling's Director of PR and Social Media, along as your host of Sterling Live. I'm very excited to, be back here for another episode. We did have an episode a couple of weeks back that we told you that this episode was coming. So we prepped it, and now we're ready to go. So as you can see, I have two guests above me here. We today have Mel Gasek, Manager of Investigations, Sterling Diligence, and Heather Pelton, Head of Operations, Investigations for Sterling Diligence. Our topic today is on the bottom of our screen. We're doing an overview of NAIC investigations. So, Heather and Mel, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'd love for the two of you to introduce yourselves to our audience. So, Mel, I will go ahead with you.
Hi, I have been with the diligence team here with Sterling for a little over 5 years. I began as an investigator, and I've slowly made my way up to manager. Prior to that, I was more recently into citizenship, and then I moved and progressed into executive investigations and NAIC projects. And I've also worked prior in the government security clearance industry for a bit over a decade.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for that, and welcome to Sterling Live. Heather, I don't have to welcome you because you've been on Sterling Live a couple of times already, but I'm so happy to have you back. Would love for you just to reintroduce yourself to our audience.
Of course. I'm happy to be back. I have been with Sterling Diligence for 8 years today, actually. And I began as an investigator, moved over to leading our executive investigations team for a few years. And then I'm currently the head of operations for all of our diligence business lines for the past 2 years. So prior to coming over here to Sterling, I worked also in the government security clearance industry for about 10 years.
Well, thank you for coming back with us on another episode. Congratulations on 8 years with Sterling. If you're watching live, pop in a congratulations to Heather in the comment section. So let's give her all that props there. Congrats to you. That's amazing. So speaking of our comment section, if you are watching live, normally right now I'd be telling you if you have questions to please send them over. I'm going to say, though, this episode is actually extremely targeted and extremely detailed in the responses that we are going to give you. So we're not going to take questions during this episode. If you do have questions, though, please follow up. We're going to give you some contact information after we get through this discussion. And if you have even more questions after that contact information, you've got us. You can contact Sterling's corporate LinkedIn page. So again, please hold on any questions during this episode. And Heather, you have some congrats already coming in through. So thank you. And again, congrats to you, Heather, on 8 years. So let's go ahead and get into this episode. I have a lot of questions for the two of you. So we're going to start with just like an overview here. Both of you work for Sterling Diligence, obviously. So Heather, can you briefly educate us on what Sterling Diligence is in relation to the standard Sterling that most of our audience that's watching knows?
Yep. So a pretty high level overview is that in general, our diligence is the investigative arm of Sterling. So we're an independent division that conducts deeper dive investigations for C-suite or high impact level hires. And then we also conduct business due diligence investigations, essentially risk mitigation for organizations, a lot of times reserved for investment deals, M&A transactions, things of that nature. And in comparison, Sterling's bread and butter standard background check is your pre-hire verification, criminal credit, maybe global sanctions, drug testing type checks, where they're verifying or either confirming or refuting what a candidate disclosed about themselves on a resume or application. And naturally, the turnaround time and cost are more imperative as they're typically higher volume and need to get folks in the door quickly. Sterling Diligence is more of your premium service where We have a little bit higher cost associated with our investigations. We pay very close attention to detail, give an extra level of care and service in these deep dive investigations. So we take resumes, profiles, build a full investigation, and then we partner with Sterling's robust capabilities and then our investigators to paint a full picture of somebody's background for different purposes. And then our diligence team also conducts these NAIC investigations as part of our service, but they do differ a little bit. There's some different requirements that we're going to discuss throughout the episode.
It's critical on these episodes that, we do differentiate the two to make sure our audience knows exactly what we're talking about. When we do these deep dives, they fully understand that. So thank you, Heather, for letting our audience know there. So the biggest chunk of today's episode, we're going to talk about insurance licensing investigation. So I'd like to get it started with a little bit more of an overview as well. So Mel, can you explain what the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, also known as NAIC, is and why they require background checks and investigations?
The NAIC serves to protect public interest and consumers in establishing national standards and best practices to ensure a strong insurance marketplace. NAIC promotes competitive markets by improving state regulation of insurances. So it requires the evaluation of suitability, competency, character, and integrity of an applicant, company's ultimate controlling person, which is referred to as the affiant, and connection with the applicant, company's pending or future applications for licensure or a permit to organize within insurance department in one or more states.
Oh, I think.
Sorry, we lost you.
I lost you, Caitlin. Yeah, it sounds like you're muted.
Oh, I am. Can you hear me now?
You're back.
Yes.
Oh, good. I think I was just muted that entire time, to be honest. And how many times has that happened over the course of the last 4 years? Many, and probably too many to count. But what I was saying, excuse me, is that we obviously know that they require these background checks and investigations. So, Heather, my question to you was, who can conduct background checks or investigations for the NAIC, excuse me.
Yeah, so only an agency that's listed on the NAIC website can be used to fulfill these checks. All of the agencies listed have been vetted and approved by the NAIC organization, and individual states are likely to reject a background report from any agency not listed on that site. And we're here because Sterling Diligence is an approved vendor to conduct and deliver these checks in line with their regulations.
And to stay with you, Heather, how are they defining what a third party is?
Yeah, so according to the NAIC, a third party must be a consumer reporting agency, such as Sterling, and therefore subject to the FCRA. They also have to be vetted and currently on the approved list, as I mentioned. The NAIC also requires that a third party have the ability to perform international background investigations, and that officers and directors have no material affiliation with the applicant company or the client requesting these checks in this case. And finally, that the third party has agreed to comply with the NAIC's their background reporting best practices and guidelines.
So we've discussed now that they require these checks. Who can actually conduct them? What you had just defined as what a third party is. I'd like to now get into a little bit more detail around these investigations and these checks. So Mel, I actually have a couple of questions directed specifically towards you. So my first one is, what type of information do you need to conduct an NAIC investigation?
The NAIC biographical affidavits requests information with respect to the affiant's personal information, employment history, education, and character. It must be completed, and I must stress this, must be completed on the most recent current form found on the NAIC website. And in effect, at the time the affidavit was signed, and shall not be signed more than 6 months. So there is a limit as to when we can use the submitted biographical affidavit, and it does have an expiration date. At that point, it kind of sets it up to the point where they submit to us, we approve the affidavit because we're aware of the guidelines and rules of NAIC requirements. and then they can then submit their application to the state agency.
So with the biographical affidavit, how is this differing? How does this differ, from a standard Sterling or Sterling Diligence consent form? And then what is that information that's collected there?
The biographical affidavit acts essentially as the consent form. To perform the investigation comes directly from the NAIC, and the affidavit itself includes the disclosure and authorization form. The signature of the affiant on the form permits the independent third party, which would in this instance be us, to conduct an independent third party verification on the affiant. The information that will be collected on the BA is the affiant's personal information, as well as employment, and again, education, residence, any professional licensures or business affiliations within the past 20 years. And it also collects information regarding any criminal history, filings, civil litigation, any fines imposed by state insurance departments, regulatory authorities, and/or information wherein the affiant was an investment committee member or a controlling stockholder. In comparison to the standard consent form that you might see, it's essentially more like an application.
Got it. So I think it's pretty obvious that a hot topic around like a standard background check, maybe for those listening or for the two of you, a hot topic is turnaround time. How quickly is this going to take? How long is this going to take? So I'm curious, as probably our audience is curious too, what does a typical turnaround time look like for these types of checks?
The general turnaround time would be within the 20 business days, and this is more relative to larger batch orders, which could be anywhere between 5 to 15 affiants submitted at the same time by one applicant company. These reports are to be submitted to the relevant state agencies at the same time, hence why it may take longer, give or take. But of course, when anything is complete and if it's completed earlier, it will be submitted earlier. There are certain instances where the turnaround time might differ. And this is more so in regards that if you request an update report that we've already conducted within a year, the turnaround time is reduced to 10 days or less as far as business days. And if we've conducted a report prior and you just require a state delivery only of a completed TPV report within the 6 months of the BA signature, that's generally just going to be the 1 business day tag.
Are there any special or different delivery guidelines for a check or an investigation like this?
We deliver directly to the relevant state entities, and unlike regular background checks, these do not go back to the clients. We partner with our client when they fill out their position or their position of the application to the state. These are not meant for making hiree decisions, so it's pretty strict on who can actually have access to the completed reports. And mainly it would be directly to the requesting state. It could be 1 or 2 or 3, depending on what the order was placed for. And if the affiant themselves checks on the disclosure and authorization form within the biographical affidavit, they can also receive a copy.
Now, this has been some great information so far.
Definitely. And of course, there are always differing secure areas of delivery, and that is per what the state requests. They usually set up their own secure delivery systems.
So I know that our audience loves examples. They love all the information and the details we give them, we provide on Sterling Live. But when we give them the nice examples, they're like, aha, I think that makes a little bit more sense. So can you provide some examples of ways you uncover information for these types of checks?
Essentially, in the case of NAIC reports themselves, we are confirming the information that was provided by the affiant and put into an NAIC approved format. These checks are going to be conducted more in alignment with standard checks. However, we can add in specific instances where there's areas where they were not disclosed in any regulatory issues or things like that. But generally, we are confined to checking up on things that were actually put into the applications. And with that comes consequences by the state regulatory authorities themselves if they're not disclosed.
I know that was like a whirlwind of like 20
Sorry.
questions. So thank you. No, I'm saying thank you. I just kept pushing them your way, and you got them all. So I appreciate that, as I do know our audience does as well. So Heather, I'm going to jump back to you for my next question. And this is just a small subtopic of our larger topic today. Much as turnaround time is a popular topic that we address all the time, the way in which our capabilities extend from a global perspective is a very, very hot topic for us also. So Heather, do these capabilities extend from a global perspective?
Absolutely, they do. It much like our business due diligence and our executive investigations, we have robust international capabilities to fulfill these when warranted. We work in tandem with Sterling and their capabilities, and then we also have the ability to conduct investigations in nearly every region of the world. We have long-standing partnerships with our sources who are private investigators like us with expertise in their regions, and they can access information as allowed. So it's part of the requirement to be an approved vendor is to be able to do this, but we have, given our nature of our other diligence business, we have a lot of connections with folks around the world.
That's great. I want to circle back. Being one of the larger things we've discussed today is that biographical affidavit. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. So Mel, I have two more questions for you around this. Can you explain some of the unique fields here that are required for NAIC investigations that may not be typically seen or required for a regular background check?
The standard fields on the NAIC forms would be related to any personal information such as PII or employment history provided that you might find on a general application form. However, within the actual biographic affidavit, as I've mentioned before, there is a disclosure and authorization section, which is within the body of the BA itself. It is required to be signed, dated, and notarized, which you might not see generally anywhere else. And you must answer within the provided spaces allotted. So the BA is a little bit different. The NAIC itself has a required standard format for those applicant companies submitting for their applications. So they have addendum pages that must follow in alignment with the initial document. And within those addendums, they also must be signed and dated. So they're very specific about the order of delivery. And if anything like that is out of alignment, they will return it to you.
Speaking of out of alignment, are there some common mistakes and errors that you see when you're reviewing this?
Unfortunately, the common things that I do see is that the biographical affidavit itself is not notarized. It does require that you have a signature date and notary, which would, again, set it apart from most application forms. And all blank sections must be answered. I know that coming from a government background, I'm used to no empty spaces. But a common error that I see when we get these biographical affidavits turned in is they don't put none or NA. And that's just been a specific thing that is hard hit on any meetings that we have with state entities or the NAIC itself. What I would commonly see is not seeing them putting in ongoing court proceedings because they're unsure if they have to disclose something that was prior or if it's something that's current. And as far as the NAIC is concerned, it is best practice to put those in because we will find them. And then that would result in any kind of discrepant marking on the document. And then the NAIC would come back and have questions for the applicant company. So it's just best practice to put that in so you don't have that extra legwork when it could have been resolved immediately. Another thing is I commonly see is not doing your own research. Like, okay, well, I didn't know the company address or I didn't know my supervisor's phone number. And if you reference to the NAIC website guidance, they suggest that you do put in that effort. It's not, the onus is not on us or the NAIC to track down your references or to determine which location that your employment was. By not doing the research to identify the correct contact information for employers and things like that, it will definitely be marked as discrepant when we actually put it into the report because we've identified it, but it can delay the process.
So unfortunately, we are seeing these errors, these common mistakes, but
Correct.
Everyone listening, Mel just outlined for you what you need to have done. So let's aim for no more errors, maybe.
I will also add, Caitlin, too, Mel's really great at this too, is just when she identifies it, she tries, goes back to the client or the requester immediately to try to resolve it before we undertake the investigation, which circles back to why it sometimes takes longer in our turnaround time, because we're trying to partner and make sure these errors are fixed before we have to send
When
it.
it's definitely hard hitting, and to follow up on what Heather says, we are required to mark something as discrepant. Even if it's the smallest thing, the company name's different, the date of hire is different, the end date is anything, it's marked as a discrepant item.
Yeah.
So it's definitely good to put in your research before you complete that form.
Great advice for sure. So I have one final question before I get some final thoughts from the two of you on today's very detailed, and I learned a lot on this episode today. So Heather, my final question is for you, and it deals with compliance. I think we talk about compliance in probably every episode of Sterling Live that we do. So the FCRA is regulatory for employment-related background checks and Sterling Diligence executive investigations. Does the FCRA apply to these investigations as well?
Absolutely. The third-party reports we are compiling are subject to the FCRA because the state departments of insurance that are receiving these and the applicant company who is seeking admission are considered users of the consumer reports. And additionally, the company and the state departments of insurance are required to comply with the FCRA on their end, especially as it relates to the confidentiality of the information in these reports.
Great. All right. So as I said earlier, just really detailed episode. I learned a lot. I know our audience learned a lot. You're going to actually I see it coming through now on LinkedIn. It'll go up on Facebook and YouTube as well. You're going to get some links and some email addresses to go to if you need any more information again, or if you need to contact anyone regarding information from today's episode. So while we're actually loading up these links and these email addresses for you, I'd love to get some final thoughts from the two of you on today's topic, on today's episode. So Mel, I will start with you for final thoughts for today.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I hate to hit the topic over and over again, but it's really important that any questions regarding the entire process or application, to state delivery, to the application process, to dealing with third-party vendors, all of that information can be found on the NAIC website. They're very good about having an extensive library of Q&As that they've heard in the past to date, to include all required forms if you're unsure of what is the most recent form that you need. Everything is updated and are all available directly from the website. And anything that's not currently in use will be rejected by the state. We are required to make those rejections. And I would like to just reiterate that we do not reject a biographical affidavit if we think that it would go through to the state. So I understand there are questions sometimes where, why are you asking for this or that? It's because it's very strict, and that continues to pivot. So we try to keep update. We meet on calls and things like that, but I'm not going to steer you wrong. I definitely want to make it go through the first time. So please ask the questions. If you need a follow-up, go straight to the website, which will be available to you.
Absolutely. It's always, again, reach out. We're here to help. Obviously, like you just said, we want things to go through. So we're here to support that. And the links, yes, now are across all of the platforms that we live stream on. So we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you need the links out to the NAIC, and then there's also contact information from Sterling as well. So please go ahead. If you have any questions, refer to all the information we just put in the chat. Heather, final thoughts from you for today's episode.
Yeah, so as we've discussed, throughout the questioning, these checks really are more inclusive and time-consuming than your standard check. The information is the same, as Mel mentioned, the verifications, things like that, but they are asking for some specific court information. Certain aspects are a little bit different. And so as we discussed, we comb through these affidavits and partner with our clients to ensure these requirements are met, because we don't want to waste their time, our time, or even the individual state's time if they do get rejected and we have to go through this all again. And so we do have a team of skilled investigators who come from all different backgrounds, which really do bring different perspectives to the table, depending on whether it's due diligence, employment, or NAIC. And then the support staff attends regular NAIC group sessions, as Mel just mentioned, to stay up to date on the latest changes and recommendations so we can be the best partner we can be.
Thank you for that. And obviously, thank you to the two of you for joining us today on Sterling Live. I know we normally ask for questions throughout the episode, but again, if you do have any questions, we ask for them to come afterwards. But yeah, really, really awesome. A lot of detail. Again, I learned a lot. I know our audience did. So I want to take this time to thank our audience who tuned in live today and those who are watching on demand. And Heather and Mel, thank you again so much for joining me on today's episode of Sterling Live.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, everyone. I will catch you on the next episode.